Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about how the world of work and our attitudes to work are changing. This show is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, a London-based company where we help teams and organizations transition to an office-optional approach. To have a look at what we do and the show notes to our podcast episodes, head over to virtualnotdistant.com. Thank you for spending your time with us. Hello and welcome to episode 207 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. And today's show is all about growing a remote organization. And for that, I have not one, not two, but three guests, not all at the same time, but from separate conversations. So this is the first of a different kind of episode, a more topic-led rather than guest-led. So I'd be very interested to hear what you think. So virtualnotdistant.com is the website to go and contact us. Last episode 206 was huge. It was just Maya Middlemiss and myself talking about collaboration platforms. We split the file into two, and we'd love to hear what you thought of that episode also. And finally, so today's episode has Wade Foster, CEO of Zapier, in it, and also Jeremiah Smith from Simple Tiger. And I actually recorded those two interviews many months ago. And I think I did them on the same day, and I happened to have the same set of questions for them. So I thought at one point, hey, they're very different people, the companies are very different, how they've approached growing, and even what growing means for them is very different. Why don't I stick them in and give you something that contrasts? And then I spoke to Tim Burgess from Shield Geo last week about something different, and he came up with stuff that I thought, actually, that is very relevant to that other episode. So I've got a little bit of him in here today. And I hope that you will start to hear the same voices coming back, because I really like that as a listener, and podcasters usually create the podcasts that they would like to listen to. So, and what I'm going to do is when I talk to guests, I will talk about different things, and then I'll see if I can pull them into different episodes. You'll still get a huge range. You'll still have guests that you hear once and then probably not again, which is probably the case with Wade and Jeremiah from today. So we'll see how it goes. So as host, I'm here with you on my own. So I've got that big thing on growing a remote organization. But before we move on to that, if we haven't met before, my name is Pilar Orti. I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, and you can interact with me on Twitter at Pilar Orti. So that's the little introduction. If you are a regular listener, welcome. There's so many shows out there, so I'm very happy that you're back. So yeah, before we move on to the conversation, let's have a look at what's going on. So this is a new section, relatively new to the show, where we discuss what is going on now in the world of work, especially in the world of remote work, leading virtual teams, online collaboration, etc. And the funny thing is that we hadn't done this before, because I thought, well, I don't want to date the episodes. However, a lot of what we're talking about is still going to be relevant for the next 2 or 3 years. Things are moving relatively slowly. So anything that we talk about in this section might still be of interest a few years from now. So just so that you know, I'm recording this on the 2nd of September, 2019. You'll be listening to it at least in a couple of weeks' time. And the first article I want to have a look is actually a piece of research that was released in July 2019. And I'm going to quote, and I'm going to put the link in the show notes to a summary of the study, but that link has a link to the PDF. So if you're one of those people like me that yeah, you read the summary and then you go, okay, let me now go and see if the summary has missed anything out. Then you can have a look at the original research. To be honest, this comes from a Harvard Business School Working Knowledge website. So the summary is pretty good, pretty solid. And it has lots of detail on who's been surveyed. Anyway, I suggest that you read it. So if you want to Google it straight away, how companies benefit when employees work remotely. And it's an article from the 29th of July, 2019 by Kristen Sens. But the person doing the research was Prithviraj Chowdhury and colleagues. So also known as Raj, as I found out on Twitter. I love Twitter. Tweet me at Pilar Orti. Say hello. So what I liked about this article very much is that the article looks at remote work, but in fact, work from anywhere. So it's going beyond the more traditional work from home policy that a lot of companies have, which usually requires workers to live near the office, in the case of the US Patent and Trademark Office, which is where they carried out the research. And I love that. I love that the article is saying remote work is not working from home, because I come across this a lot, that people talk about remote work and then others immediately think working from home. Whereas we can have co-working spaces, we can have cafes, we can have, I work this month from this city, this other month from this other city. I go and work in a farm in the middle of nowhere for 3 months to get some fresh air. I don't know. And as soon as we start thinking that remote work is not just working from home, we can also see the possibilities, the benefits for the individual and indeed the company. So also what I really like is that the author says that the results have important implications for workers who could potentially move to lower cost areas. And this is huge, and this is huge in the world of remote advocacy, is that we can start moving away from those hubs that are so expensive and that they're just attracting all the attention, all the talent, all the activity. I live in London, so I know. We've got to allow people to live in other places and not have to live there because the work is there. On top of that, reducing commuting costs, same thing. And also I really like that they are making this explicit and live closer to family and friends. And I don't have a huge family, but being able to communicate online and do a lot of my work online allowed me to spend time with my boyfriend before he was my husband over in Holland, and to look after my father while my mother was traveling when he was in Madrid. So it just gives you the opportunity to prioritize other aspects of your life. It could be that you like playing football. I don't mind, or that you want to play tennis every single day, and you can only do that if you live in a certain part of town. And it doesn't matter what your priority is, but this idea that we can prioritize something that's important to us beyond work, I think is really important to remember. So This is very important, that productivity increased 4.4% when employees moved from working at home on a limited basis to the location of their choice. So it's not just, you can even see an increase in productivity, because let's face it, some people are not that productive when they're working from home, and they might benefit from working somewhere else. And then finally, I like, please go and read the article, because I'm not doing it any justice. But it does say work from anywhere isn't for everyone. And actually, it talks about the level of interdependence between the people, for example, in a team. So this one is saying the people that this research was done on over 2 years, they perform their work independently, adhering to the same best practices of patent searches, but they're still independent, and they're labeling it pooled interdependence. Chowdhury stresses that the research results apply only to companies or units that employ this type of worker. They then talk about reciprocal interdependence between people, which requires continued interaction between co-workers. And also, This is really interesting. You see, when you start to go a little bit deeper, you get all these nuances, and also sequential interdependence, which involves a series of tasks performed by different employees. So if you are transitioning to remote, or if you are thinking of giving a bit more location independence to people, think about this. What kind of team are we? Do we have pooled interdependence where we're all very independent? Do we have reciprocal interdependence, which means we have to continuously interact? Or is it sequential? So sequential interdependence, for example, when the tasks are performed after someone else, if you have people over different time zones, that might be great. Whereas if you have reciprocal interdependence, that might not be as great. So they do say, if you have all those kind of closer interdependence, would this work? Well, the argument is probably yes with the stuff we've got now, but it's really important that they say, look, we looked at this type of work. So that's it. I'll give you the title again in case you want to check it out straight away and you don't have access to the show notes. How companies benefit when employees work remotely. And the author mentioned about how this allows for people to work outside city hubs, etc. And that is something that I really want to look at in a future episode, how remote work can influence social change. So if you have any ideas of people who might be able to talk about it, or if you have anything to say about it, or if you've come across a piece of research, an article that is looking at that, then please send it through. You can email me Pilar, Pilar, at virtualnotdistant.com, or go to our contact form, virtualnotdistant.com. Good. So that is one. Now we also had the summer, lots of stuff came out. August 13, 2019, Flex Jobs 2009 annual survey. I found this very interesting, not from the usual, what you would expect, and especially from someone like Flex Jobs saying, look, what we found is that flexible options are very important when people are looking for work. But also, I'm just going to touch on some of them. So I suggest you, again, do look at the piece, the summary. It's written by Brie Reynolds, who was in this show some time ago. So the 4 options of why people seek remote, flexible work. We're not just talking remote, flexible. Work-life balance, number 1 at 75%. Then family, 45%. Time savings, 42%. Commute stress, 41%. These are very interesting, the ones that follow. Well, I think they are. One is avoiding office politics and distractions at 33%. That is interesting for me because you might still have those. But if we're talking about flexible work where you design your own schedule and you decide when to interact with people, etc., then you might be able to manage that a bit better. But when we're talking at purely remote, location-independent work, there's no reason why this stuff doesn't still happen. So I find that interesting. It's still quite important, 33%. And then travel, 29%. Cost savings, 25%. Yeah. They said, the article says, the following 3 options also stood out. Being a pet owner, 24%. I'd never thought of that. I have no pets and no children, so that's having to look after someone else. I do understand it, but not specifically the pets. I hadn't thought of that one. And then having caregiving responsibilities, 18%, always top of my mind. And then living in a bad local job market, 15%. I have a feeling that is going to increase over the next, however, a decade, whatever. That flexible options, and especially location independent, remember this is about flexible work, not necessarily location independent. I think that is so important, that living in a bad local job market can get you to seek work outside of that bad job market. Makes complete sense. Then they have most important factors when evaluating a job prospect. You're going to have a look at that. Who wants work flexibility? Pet owner, 28%. What is this? A freelancer, 25%. Entrepreneur, 20%. And the 4th one, introvert, 20%. Again, we have an episode on introversion a couple of episodes back. Check that out. Chronic physical issue or illness, 11%. Again, we rarely talk about that very openly. It talks about the most desired flexible work options, how remote work affects productivity, etc. So, yeah, and also the people reasons that they work. Interesting. Why do people work? So check that out. If you have any feedback on it, anything you'd like to share with other listeners, then go ahead, send them through pilar@virtualnotdistant.com. And now on a slightly different tone, a different kind of news, some of you might have been using Zapier.in for meetings. And I just got an email through because I've got an account with them. I don't use it often, but I do have an account just saying Zapier.in is now whereby. The email says we've had a long-standing trademark dispute over the Zapier.in name that resulted in no longer being able to use it. So they're saying we're turning this trademark challenge into an opportunity to rebrand with our future vision in mind, changing the way people work. Our new name, Whereby, reflects our vision of enabling people to work where they want to and by what means they want. I thought this is part of news, so I thought I'd share it with you. And talking of meetings, if you are looking for some online training on remote meetings, then I can recommend Judy Rees and Lisette. Judy Rees and Lisette Sutherland's Remote Meetings Masterclass series. I will stick the link in the show notes. It starts on Wednesday, 18th of September, 2019. So you still have a week if you're listening to this on release date. So check that out. My book, Online Meetings That Matter, will be out at some point. But meanwhile, if you are in a rush to get better, then check out the ladies' training. And of course, Lisette and Judy are both, I would say, friends of the show. Lisette used to be a co-host and Judy has been a guest. Also, talking of meetings and Judy and Lisette, Judy organized a series of articles on InfoQ, the online magazine, on online meetings, and she gathered together, a great group of people. I am biased. They've all been on this show and I rate all of them. So Lisette has written a piece with Elise Keith from Lucid Meetings. I think Mark Kilby is also writing an article, and Judy's written one. She wrote the first in the series, and also Nancy Settle Murphy has already got another one out, and I've got an article out as well. If you want to join us for a session to celebrate the launch of this series, then there is a meeting happening on the 1st of October 2019 at 3 o'clock BST, 3 o'clock in the evening BST. And it's called Mastering Remote Meetings, How to Run Effective Remote Meetings. It's a free event for readers of InfoQ, so I will stick the link in the show notes. Well, that's all the big news. I've got lots of other stuff to share with you, but I could go on and on. We'll leave it to the next episode. Just to say, meanwhile, news at Virtual Not Distant. Well, we are in the process of putting together the leading your remote team through visible teamwork. So leading through visible teamwork. As you see, I haven't got the title really in my mouth yet, but leading remote teams through visible teamwork is all about visible teamwork. And reading through the article on the research from Harvard Business Review, where the researchers said, well, we've looked at this kind of team where people are very independently working from each other, and we'll have to see how these location-independent policies can work when our work is more dependent from each other. I thought, well, it's visible teamwork. And they also in the article mentioned this thing about spontaneity and the joy that a physical office can bring us through spontaneous interactions with others. Not the same thing, but it can pretty much be recreated in the online space. And the concept of planned spontaneity is one of the things that I talk about when I talk about visible teamwork, and that will be in the course as well. So I'll stick the link in the show notes if you want to register before the course is out, and then you'll find out as soon as it's out. The other thing is this autumn, we will start to look at how we're going to start offering podcasting for connection services. And this is about helping organizations transition to remote, create a podcast, a show. So remember, a podcast is a show and this is an episode. So a podcast will be many episodes. How to create that with people from the organization, for people of the organization. So really podcasting for connection. In addition to that, I haven't tried this out yet, but I am convinced that for virtual teams, especially those that start to be beyond 8, 9 people, creating a podcast where different team members look after separate episodes every, say, 2 weeks can help with the sense of belonging, can help to share more about ourselves, can help to understand each other's values. So we'll be looking at that as well. And finally, another podcasting point is we would love, and we at the moment, mainly Maya and I, and Ross, of course, does the podcast polishing, but Maya and I have a lot to say about the world of remote work because it is becoming so huge and diverse. We would love to create more podcasts, but we don't have the resources in the company. So we are looking for a partner that will help us with whatever resources they can contribute. And really a partnership is what we're looking for. So if your company thinks that they can benefit and they would like to hop on board to create more episodes with us, then please let me know and we can talk. I don't know how this will pan out, but we are at the moment we're exploring this. There must be a way. So Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com. That's PILAR. I would love to hear from you. And if you do go to the website virtualnotdistant.com, remember you can sign up to our newsletter. And remember, our book Thinking Remote is out as ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Right, well, now we are officially in the meat of today's episode. And as I was just saying, one of the things that has happened as this podcast has evolved, and since I set up Virtual Not Distant, is that the world of remote work has expanded. So once upon a time, there were there were similar ways in which virtual teams operated, for example. But now we don't just have virtual teams, we have fully remote organizations, distributed organizations with no office as a base, or at least not one office that everyone is supposed to regularly go to do the work. So I thought that the 2 interviews that I did some time ago with Wade Foster from Zapier and Jeremiah Smith from Simple Tiger, they really illustrate this point that there is not one way of doing remote, just as there is not one way of leading a business or managing a team or growing a business, etc. So with these 2 contrasting experiences, I thought it would be interesting to hear about 2 different ways of setting up, building up, and recruiting for completely distributed companies. Plus, I was recording with someone else, with Tim Burgess, and we landed on a discussion that I thought was quite relevant around hiring internationally. So I thought I'd bring that in. And let's not forget that Virtual Not Distant is a remote company. I didn't set it up to be this way, but not having an office is the first step in the direction. I work a lot from home, but I also work from a co-working space. And wanting to work with people I enjoy working with and who can also do a good job has always been my main driver for running my own business. And luckily, the way we're working and the nature of this business means that that's not a location-dependent thing. And also because our work is so specific now that to find people who would need to come into London to work on what we're working now, it would have been very difficult. So I'll chip into the conversation. Our organization is by no means as established as the other 3 companies that we're featuring, but seeing as I'm here with you, then I might as well share. I thought, okay. So let's start now with Wade Foster. So he started Zapier in 2011, and he explains where the idea came from while he was working with co-founder Brian Helmig.
Brian and I had been doing some freelancing, and we'd been asked to build integrations for a couple clients. So we built like a PayPal QuickBooks connector. We built a WordPress form plugin that could hook into Salesforce. And Brian sort of had this realization. He said, a lot of folks need to have integrations. They'd like to automate some of the work between all these common tools they're using in their businesses. And if we built sort of a simple way for your average business user to set this stuff up, people would probably like it. And so that's kind of where the initial idea for Zapier came from. And really that's what it is today, is we connect into 1,400 different apps, things that you use in your business like Salesforce, MailChimp, Slack, G Suite, you name it, we probably support it and help you build these simple integrations all the way to more complex workflows that you might use to help kind of run your business.
In contrast, listen to why Jeremiah Smith decided to go from contractor to running a fully remote company over 12 years ago. And Jeremiah, remember, is the CEO of Simple Tiger, which is a boutique agency helping clients with SEO.
So to begin with, it started off as a consulting company with just me doing consulting. And I spent my time just consulting my clients. And usually it was on nights and weekends, I spent a lot of time doing that. And then whenever I had breaks, I could take phone calls during the day and stuff like that while I was working at other jobs and everything. And then eventually, through working at other agencies and seeing how other agencies do it, I learned what I liked and did not like about working with these other agencies. And one of the big things I did not like was having to sit in rush hour traffic and then get into an office and then sit in that office for 8 to 9 hours a day. The work that I needed to do could have happened at home and in less than 9 hours a day. More like half that time in a lot of cases. And then I could get other things done as well. And then when I would ask about trying to open up the flexibility around that, I don't know, I realized really quickly I was being treated like a child in school. And it felt like I was asking for permission to do things that I shouldn't have to ask for. And so that just really rubbed me the wrong way. And I knew I would not be able to live that way in that corporate environment for long. And I also knew that this world is changing and that corporations aren't going to be able to keep their employees like they have in the past if they're going to treat them that way. They're going to have to offer up more autonomy, more flexibility in this information age because, to be honest, there's literally more I can do at home where I'm focused and people aren't interrupting me than sitting in the office where people are walking by and pulling me into meetings and stuff all the time. So that really just kind of set me off in the direction of building an agency that was entirely remote.
And I think it's worth noting that both of these companies do business in the online space. So Zapier develops integrations for online applications, and Simple Tiger is a digital marketing agency specializing in search engine optimization and software as a service companies. So many of the companies leading the way as distributed organizations already need most of their employees to be behind a computer online to do their work. I really think it's worth remembering that. Okay, so you're doing business online, that's difficult enough, but why would you want to grow your workforce? Why would you want to make your life more difficult and hire more people? Wade?
So today's Zapier is over 200 people, but we were pretty slow about hiring in the early days. We were focused on revenue. We were focused on trying to, make this business a profitable one, which is somewhat a rare approach in tech these days. And so for the first over a year, we were the only 3 people that ever worked on this. And then, 2013, we hired 3 people as we started to make a little bit more money. And, the next year we hired 5 people as we started to make a little more money. And then the next year we hired 10 people. And then it ended up being like about doubling every year as the company really accelerated and grew and more folks started to become customers and get value out of the business. And really just in the last couple of years, that's what's accelerated us to 200 people.
So has the driver behind that growth been just the number of customers, or is there something else?
Yeah, I think, customers is obviously the thing that drives growth and revenue for our business. A big sort of accelerant for us has been the focus on the number of applications we support. So, if we support the tools you use in your business, you're likely going to want to use Zapier to connect the common things that you use. But if we don't support them, then we're less useful to you. And so that first year, we built 50 apps on Zapier ourselves. And today we have over 1,400. So that focus on making sure that we support the applications that you use, no matter what it is, has been a really important part of helping us grow.
As we were growing, we were working with more and more clients that were larger and that needed more effort from our team. They needed more production of SEO related items. And so it pretty much required more man hours and more labor that I did not have the freedom to to provide. And so I eventually had to hire a specialist to help me carry some of the load. And so I hired one person who helped me carry a small portion of the whole SEO puzzle, and she did a fantastic job. And then I eventually hired on another person to help carry another portion of it. And then before I knew it, I had a full team around me who could carry the entire production side of SEO, while my brother and I, my brother really helped me kind of take Simple Tiger from being just me to being multiple people. The two of us just focused on doing sales and kind of managing the company overall. And then from there, we were able to really strengthen our team and get everyone to where he and I don't have to exactly do SEO full time. We have a team who does that now. We just have to work on the business and keep it running smoothly with sales and some management.
So there's not one way of growing and hiring. You can go through a long interview and recruitment process. You can contract people who can then become full-time. It really depends on the nature of the business. For myself, at Virtual Not Distant, we work with freelancers. And we are bootstrapping it, as people say, which just means that we have no investment funding. So as a consultancy and training company, business is very erratic. And so for myself as business owner at this stage, it doesn't make sense to employ anyone. We're seeing how we can move into selling products, which would expand our customer base from selling to organizations to selling directly to consumers, because there's more consumers. Look out, an online course coming your way. And also we are finding ways of generating income so that we can do more podcasting, as I said earlier on. So for now, it makes sense to continue working with freelancers as the work comes in to Virtual Not Distant. Plus, I think there is so much benefit in bringing people in who work in other places. Also, even if they work for one other client, it's free learning and development for them. They are learning away from me also without it costing us anything. And it's great because they can get developed elsewhere and bring in new ideas into the company. And of course, hopefully stuff that they learn when they are here can also be cross-fertilized and cross-pollinated into other places. So that's one way of thinking about it. My strategy for recruiting is actually networking. So it's meeting different kinds of people, facilitators and trainers who deliver face-to-face, those who deliver online, people in the UK who focus on, digital transformation or even just workplace development, people who work internationally. And once I'm doing that, and I'm very mindful that I don't want to be just looking into a very small pool of people, which is why I tend to pull from different parts of my life, also try and meet people from different parts of my life. I went to a science college, so I have lots of contacts there. I also went to a theatre school. So I've done lots of different things. Once I find people, what I then try to do is to find small projects we can do together so that we can really test what it's like working together. Because experience has taught me that there's nothing like getting down to creating something together. A workshop, consultancy, a book, an episode, a presentation, an event. Once you're working on that, you really know what it's like to work with someone. I found that you can talk forever, but it's when you say go, that's when you realize what it's going to be like. So that's how a relatively new company like Virtual Not Distant might go about growing. But how do other faster growing companies do it? Okay, well, same focus. You focus on what matters. So we'll now hear from Wade as to how they hire at Zapier and how their system has changed. Have a listen.
The thing that's really helped us, which we put into place early on, was our value system. So one of our first employees, Micah, and I sat down as we were scaling out our support org, and we asked ourselves this question: what makes someone successful at Zapier? What are the traits that make them successful? And we came up with a whole list of things, and then we kind of whittled it down to about 5 different things that we felt represented the values behind Zapier. And those have been refined over time since then, but those became sort of our core values of what we thought if people demonstrated these traits, their success rates inside of Zapier would be higher than if they didn't have these things. And we made those values part of our hiring rubrics. So in addition to evaluating folks against the specific skills of the role, we would evaluate them against these values. And then we also made it part of the performance reviews too. And so that way our value structure became this sort of undercurrent in sort of the inside the organization that encouraged people to kind of embrace those and use those as a way of how they think about their work. And that has really helped us make sure that we're evaluating people properly for our roles.
And who is in charge of recruiting?
In the early days, it was me. I hired and interviewed every single person, up to 80 people inside of the company. I felt that that was a critical, valuable thing that I could do to make sure that we held the hiring bar quite high. Nowadays, we have a recruiting team that helps make a lot of this stuff happen for us. We have a 5-person recruiting team that does a lot of the initial screening and does the interviews against the values and things like that. And then the hiring managers come in and help out with screening on the skills that we're looking for those specific roles.
And what happens during the recruitment process? Is there a technical piece? Then I imagine there's some kind of interview. How does it work?
Yeah, we have a couple interview steps. We start with what's called a job fit interview. And this is to make sure that your value system align with our value system, that your interest in our job matches up with the actual job that we have, to make sure that your interests are aligned with sort of the role. Then we move on to a skills test. And this often includes a small take-home test to kind of assess a real-life situation that you might see on the role. And then there's a follow-up skills interview around that test to kind of ask you about your approach and how you thought about the problem, what you might do differently if you had more time, things like that. And then final step tends to be a panel interview with a handful of teammates, and we typically include someone who is not in your function as well, to get a more broader sense of your skills and how you can contribute outside of your core area. And then we do reference checks, and then typically we make an offer. So that's sort of like the skeleton of the recruiting process. And depending on the role, there might be an extra step or two. If there's extra sophistication in the role, or if the role is a little more senior or things like that, we might add on little bits to make sure to vet for other sort of skills and things like that. But that skeleton is at the heart of basically all of the interviews we do.
So that's what you would expect in a company, a thorough recruiting process. And furthermore, a company where values come in at the recruitment stage is looking after its culture. So if you're advocating for remote in your organization, this is a great example of the fact that in distributed organizations, you can still look after culture, but you have to be very deliberate about it. And the recruitment process is a very good place to start. Now, Jeremiah from Simple Tiger took a very different approach, a very self-aware approach, which is something so important when we work remotely, especially when we're leading people or bringing people to work with us. We have to be very self-aware. So Jeremiah's practice also goes against the perception that sometimes when we're building online relationships, we forget that there are human beings on the other side.
Hiring on people has actually been, it was always a scary thing for me because I'm a very committed person. And so I'm scared that when I hire someone, if anything bad happens, I'm going to have to let them go. I don't want to go through that. So I'm very scared to hire people. So anyway, I did take it very seriously, and we had a pretty good process for handling it. We would start off with a freelance contractor relationship and say that we want this to turn into a full-time employment, but we want to test the fit first. We want to see if you work well with us and if we work well with you, if you're happy with the work. And if you're willing to be patient and give us 30, 60 days as a contractor, we'll pay you hourly or whatever, then we can look at doing a salary job and going full time. And so we were lucky enough to have some people who were interested in doing that to begin with. And usually in the first few weeks, we could tell if someone is going to be a long-term employee or not. Mm-hmm. And so starting as a contractor is a really good thing to do in the US, because if you hire somebody as a W-2 employee or a full-time employee, it's very difficult when you go to fire them, because the way the unemployment insurance works and things like that, you can get in trouble if you do that a lot. And so for us, we didn't want to set the precedent of hiring someone and firing them. I don't want to do that. First of all, it's wasteful. It's a bad practice. It not only wastes my time, but their time. It hurts them too, and hurts their stability. I want to create a very stable company. So I started very honestly, and I said, look, we want to hire full time, but to protect both of us, let's start as a contractor relationship and see if we can make that work. And if we can make that work, then we can make the full-time salary thing work. And so, that's just been very effective for us.
And has the way in which you look for people changed at all?
Yeah, it has. So we originally were kind of looking around Twitter and different sites that we were connected in, and we would talk to people and try to find people and things like that. And then we would also start using job boards, and I found a job board I really, really love, and I still love it to this day. It's weworkremotely.com, and I'm not getting paid to say that. I love using that job board. So the whole idea behind that job board is it is 100% remote. So any jobs that are posted there are remote jobs, and they're very cool, cutting edge, aggressive companies that are on that job board. So I really like that. And we just decided to post a few different job applications up there, and have gotten literally hundreds of applicants. We were overwhelmed with applicants every time. And then the people that have honestly been the best hires have been people who have reached out to us and said, hey, whenever there's a job opening, I'd like to work with you. I like your core values. I like what you guys do. I like how you are. I feel like I would fit with your company. And after hearing enough people say that, we look into them and find out that, they would make a good fit. And so we've been really, really enjoyed just the connections that people have brought to our company that way.
Another way of looking at the hiring process is to think of the kind of workforce you want to have and how the company might benefit from having people at an early stage of their career. So here's where I would like to introduce to you today's third guest. So this is Tim Burgess, co-founder of Shield GEO, where they help companies to employ and payroll their international workers when the companies are unable to do it themselves. And as I mentioned earlier, I talked to Tim about many things, and you will be hearing from him in other episodes. But I thought this particular bit about how his company has grown was relevant to this conversation. So he mentioned that while many of the businesses he works with are looking for people who already have had experience in their roles and experience in working remotely, this implies that they're looking for people already a bit into their career, which leaves out the more junior candidates. So he's taken a different view.
Hiring people who are early in their careers has been a great way for us to access bigger pools of talent, and maybe it takes some people a little longer to get up to speed. We're okay with that. We feel like we've been able to get people who are very flexible and who really apply themselves once they're given the opportunity. Particularly for a small sort of growing company, that's quite a benefit, because one of the downsides of hiring people who are further into their career, if you think about people who are 10, 15, 20 years in, is they've got a lot invested in what they do. A lot of their personality might be tied to it. A lot of their sort of status or the way they think about themselves might be linked to who they are and the job that they do. And if you go to that person and say, oh, okay, I understand that you're doing this role, but what do you think about doing something a little bit different? We think you've got transferable skills and so on. That's a big deal for them. It's a career shift. Whereas for somebody who's early in their career, 1, 2, 3, 4 years in, often they're still trying to find their feet. And sometimes what's happening with those people is they're actually going through a process of elimination. as opposed to saying, this is who I am and this is what I do, they're trying to work out, well, okay, I don't like that, but I did like these aspects of it. What else can I do that might suit me? We've had a lot of fun with those people. I think it's a really enjoyable cycle, something that some companies are missing out on.
Now, while recruiting for experience, cultural fit, alignment with values, and so on is pretty much the same as when dealing with a co-located environment, remote in some cases can add something we do not have to deal with if we're all operating within the same four walls, and that is time zone differences. So, in addition to having dealt with firsthand because of the nature of his business, Tim has also thought about this quite a bit.
If you have to move into Spain, you have to set up there because you're trying to win business there, or you've won some big Spanish banks as customers and they need a local presence, then there's a certain amount of investment and effort that's going to be justified. And you have a sense for what that commitment is going to be. But if you're doing it the other way, where you say, we've got 50 people apply for this job, and hey, we really like the look of this person in Madrid. Why don't we just hire that person? And then the next person that you hire, you go, you know what? This person's in Chile. Let's hire that person. And hey, now we've found somebody in Bangalore. Let's hire that person. Well, a couple of things have happened there. You've got 3 people who can't communicate in real time because they're all on different continents and vastly different time zones. You've got 3 people who have very different expectations of what an employment relationship looks like in terms of how is their performance managed, how's their annual leave dealt with, what happens if they fall sick, when do they get paid, And so if you are hiring without a lot of thought, let's say, or a lot of deliberation, you can get yourself in a situation where, first of all, the employee experience might not be that great. And it might not be that great because you're trying to treat everybody exactly the same when they're not. And there are pros and cons. Some people are okay with that. Some people are going to find it more difficult. But also, you might find that you're running into challenges around the sort of the norms of how you want your company, particularly communication, to operate. And so that's something certainly that we found with our company was as we started to grow, and we had, from the beginning, Duncan was in a different country to myself, Duncan being the other founder. We always had to function in a sense that we were in different places. And then he was in Europe and I was in Australia. So we had to function on asynchronous communication. And so our business has grown up with that being a part of it. Our clients are in the US, I'm in Australia, we've got a team in the UK. Those people can't all communicate at once. And that makes things harder if that's something that you haven't deliberately chosen.
At Zapier, they operate over 13 different time zones. So this is something that affects their day-to-day business. So I asked Wade whether this was something positive or not.
In some areas, it's a really awesome positive addition. So things like our support organization, time zone diversity is really quite a benefit because now we can get closer to 24/7 support. Same for like our infrastructure team. If the site goes down, having people all over the world that can help is really a big deal because now no one has to wake up in the middle of the night. The teams that I think have to adapt the most are our product teams. So there's a little tighter collaboration that goes on there. They need a little more synchronous collaboration. And so we try and group those where there's some good time zone overlap, but it's not always perfect. And so those teams often invest more in asynchronous communication tools, and they'll build individual structures that work for their teams. We try and let that be a local decision for the team itself, though, to figure out how should we operate as a group? How should we operate as a team?
Asynchronous communication, another thing we mostly don't need to worry in the co-located space. In a recent solo episode, I talked about a listener who had got in touch to suggest a topic, which was, should he go fully remote with his team or hybrid? So have some people in the office, some not. And inspired by his suggestion, I did a little solo show, which you can find in episode 205. And following that, so as a result of that episode, he said to me, one, thanks very much. There was a lot in there, great. But more importantly, it sparked off another realization. So he said, async remote is a special set of skills for working effectively. And it's super hard, and success is very much dependent upon the nature of the tasks and work. And I love that. And said I'd steal it, share it with you. So I was very glad when just a day later I was recording with Tim and asynchronous communication came up in the conversation too.
We didn't realize how important written communication was for an asynchronous distributed team. So now when we're hiring, it's one of the first things that we look at when we're having people go through our recruitment process. There's a number of steps that we use to evaluate that. But for some of the people that we hired at the beginning, it's been a bit of an adjustment because they're like, well, nobody ever told me that this was going to be so important. And we're like, yeah, sorry, but it is. We've been lucky that I think we've made that transition, or people have been willing to sort of accommodate to the best of their abilities. I think that's one of the things, certainly if I was going to do it again, I would be thinking very much around synchronous and asynchronous to start with. And I think that starts with the people who start the company. What style do you want? And if it's synchronous, then sure, you can hire remotely, sure, you can hire internationally, but I would be thinking about it in terms of time zone. So if I'm in the US, I wouldn't be thinking about Europe or Asia. I'd be looking at Canada and Central and South America. And one of the elements there is you have to feel confident that that's going to provide you a big enough talent pool that you're going to be able to hire the people that you want. I'd be very surprised. Obviously there's probably some technical roles, but certainly for what we do, we've never had problems finding people, even once we start to restrict it around those sort of parameters.
Mm-hmm. There's companies who from the very beginning decide, yes, we're only going to recruit here and here because of exactly what you're saying, or countries with a 4-hour overlap so that they can be some synchronous. Or as you say, I think that's the most important thing is just to be aware of what kind of business you are or that you might evolve to, and then looking at that. And that is one extra layer is how much is the written word going to influence our day-to-day communication? And how important that's become.
Yeah, because it's important for both sides. If you hire somebody and, they love to talk on the phone or they love chatting to people during the course of their day, and then you put them in an asynchronous environment, you're setting them up to be unhappy in many respects. And so that's bad for everybody. I used to look at companies like I remember looking at the way Balsamic was hiring, and I've always admired them as a company. And I thought, they've hired in Europe and like 2 states in the US. Why only those places? Why aren't they hiring in other places? And, now I look at it and go, oh, that was clever. You realize over time that even if you say, we're going to hire, but we're US only or these states only, if a company wants to do that and they're able to hire people that they're happy with, then good on them. It's a good business decision.
Well, communication becomes trickier as you grow, and indeed you have to be more deliberate about it. And one of the ways in which remote organizations communicate is through collaboration platforms, like in Zapier's case, Slack. But how do they organize their communication? Do they issue guidance? What guides behavior on these platforms?
Yeah. I think one of the big things we do is we have this value default to transparency, and Slack is kind of our online office, and all of the channels inside of Slack, or at least most of them, are public channels that anyone in the company can jump in and see what's going on. So if you're in marketing, you can see what our infrastructure team is doing, or if you're a designer, you can see what our support team is working on. And that creates a bit of a community around the whole company, but it also creates communities in these sort of functions where designers get to know designers really well and support gets to know support really well. In addition to that, inside of Slack, we have a set of channels that are off-topic channels. These are not work channels, and they're all prefixed with fun. So we have things like fun gardening or fun sports or fun movies or fun music, where anyone who has that interest can kind of join that channel. And there will be some sort of like light chit chat throughout the day around any sort of news or interesting things in those topic areas that come up. That helps build these sort of relationships, camaraderie, and connections across people who are in different teams in the company. And that helps people feel like they're part of this bigger mission. They're tighter with the company, those sorts of things. And I think that those kind of investments, things like that, are important in distributed companies.
Well, this episode shows that there are all sorts of things that can scale, including a sense of belonging in a remote company, tight relationships, colleagues working closely together, but you do have to look after the ecosystem and plan for it. Finally, remote work and the ability for people to work for and with others outside their country, the ability for freelancers to look beyond their close network for work, means that one-person bands can grow faster as they have more of a chance of finding the people that will be a good fit and do a good job. But remember that just because you can grow doesn't mean you should.
Honestly, doing what we do for our business gets people interested in working with us. And so we have a lot of people who reach out to us wanting jobs all the time, but we're very interested in maintaining, we want to be a boutique agency, to be honest. We want to stay small. We don't want to get too big. But being a small boutique agency is very easy for us to keep it like it is. And so we have a lot of efficiencies within the company. And so by doing that, the small team of 5 to 6 people can manage very, very large clients and do really cool work. So for us, we don't really want to grow much more. I don't really see the personnel changing much year to year now that we are at the size that we're at. Maybe a few little changes here and there as people come and go. That's the other part of the equation, is that sometimes people's desires and work change and they want to go somewhere else or they want to do something different. So that's another part of the equation too that we have to consider. And so I'm realistic about that. I don't want anyone on my team to ever leave me, but at the same time, I'm honest with them and I understand this is a job, and if they're drawn to do something else, I want them to feel empowered to go do that, and I want them to stay honest with me so that I can, do what's in our best interest as well, and just kind of watch out for everyone involved. So I totally get it, and I stay realistic.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremiah. And listeners, I think this is a great moment to wrap up the episode. I hope it sparked off some thoughts, not just around recruiting, because I know that not everyone listening runs their own company, but also about collaboration, about bringing people on board, and about what the differences are and aren't between running a co-located team or a co-located organization even, between that and running a remote team or organization, or even a hybrid. We've seen that most of the differences, they are around communication and whether we are asynchronously or synchronously communicating. I think there's a lot more conversation to be had around that. So you could check out the show notes. This is episode 207, virtualnotdistant.com if you're listening to this on a podcast app, though you probably have access to the show notes if you are subscribed to the show. You can subscribe to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, wherever there are podcasts, and I suggest you do so. Thank you very much. So Jeremiah Smith from Simple Tiger, Wade Foster from Zapier, and of course, Tim Burgess from Shield GEO. Thank you so much. I think this has been a nice it's really nice to hear contrasting experiences, but also some kind of thread throughout as well. So any questions, any feedback, anything that you would like us to cover in future podcasts? Remember, we're switching to a more theme-based. And of course, you can contact us on virtualnotdistant.com. Remember that our services include transitioning to an office optional approach and workshops on managing and leading remote teams, as well as, of course, we're preparing that online course. You can stay in touch via our newsletter. You can subscribe over at the website. And of course, check out our book, Thinking Remote, Inspiration for Leaders of Distributed Teams, which has a collection of blog posts with some leadership reflection questions at the end. I have been and I am Pilar Orti. I hope you had a good time with us wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Enjoy.